Dear Diary, today I take the next step in being an ADHD life coach at Indigo Hub. I can't believe it's happening. I want to build, create, and discover a place for us to truly be ourselves. I think this journey will be the Indigo Diary. Dear Diary, welcome world. Welcome to our new series, Series 3, The World Through Our Eyes, with your host, me, Natasha Hickling. The Indigo Diaries is a podcast for those who want to learn about ADHD through others and our own experiences. And this week, I always sound very excited to get something started, but I'm really excited because this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time with this series. Since I started this series, I wanted to get another expert to come on, but not just come on and talk about something, but come on a bit more regularly to discuss topics that we see in the neurodivergent community from clients, or something we feel that's really missing and really needs to be touched on. And I've been waiting for that coach. And when I met this coach a few episodes ago, so you will know who this is, we just clicked, and I'm fortunate enough that she agreed to come on this journey with me. So very, very fortunate that she's here, and she will be coming back for quite a few episodes. So we're going to be doing pick brain sessions, and that's questions from you, the audience or clients, where we will discuss in quite a lot of detail and explore ways forward. And we're really going to try and dive deep into these topics. So this type of episode will be running kind of every few months. And so without a doubt, I welcome back Holly.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I will give you a quick bio about Holly, but next time I won't give it you because you'll already have it. But Holly Martinson is a former public and private school teacher and has 20 plus years of experience in the field of coaching and special education. Currently, she is an integrative executive function coach with Patient Minds, of which she's the owner and founder. For a full bio, please look at the bio below. So today we're jumping in, and we're talking about what to talk about first. And we've gone for quite a heavy topic first, I would say, and it's shame.
It is a heavy topic, and it's such an important topic. And I'm so glad that you were in agreement for us to discuss this today, because I think there's just so much more that needs to be out there so that people understand they're not alone in this experience.
So we're going to be talking about shame around kind of the human experience, but then also kind of that lens of neurodivergent, and also just everything around it. So Holly, I'm interested, like, obviously this is more of a discussion, but like from where your work and your experience, what would you say shame is?
Gosh, I feel it's complex, but if I really had to kind of say it in a concise way, I would say it's this sense that instead of there's something wrong, it's a sense that there's something wrong with me. Or instead of I've made a mistake, there's a mistake with me. So it's this internal felt sense that there's something fundamentally wrong with us. And that could be based, as you said, on any number of different experiences. So
yeah, and for me, when it comes to shame, I always think of like hide and seek, and like hiding, but then when you're hiding, you're feeling the guilt of why you're hiding. It's like this almost like hidden shell, like almost like a turtle, and you're hiding, but then because you're hiding, you've been forced to hide, but then the guilt and shame and all the feelings around why you're hiding is just really apparent in your life, and it's just you're afraid to be who you want to be, and you're ashamed of who you are.
Yeah, and how sad is that there's so many of us out there that are afraid to be who we are, when we are all so unique and have so much to offer. So I appreciate that you shared that perspective too, because that's a big part of it, is, that the hiding and trying to make ourselves small.
Yeah, small. We try and make ourselves small, but we aren't small.
Right.
We're everything but small.
Exactly.
Yeah. How do you think that the thing that's coming up for me is, like, obviously everybody feels a sense of shame, at some point in their lives. What do you think it makes it different for neurodivergent?
Well, I think it's the unique challenges of it could be any number of things. The messaging that's received from school, from teachers, from well-meaning people, but who say things and provide labels early on. And then I think that shame gets kind of lodged and internalized in us, and then it just grows. It just continues to add layers. You were talking about these layers of feelings, and it just grows and grows. And I think the sense of forgetting things or not being able to, quote, handle sensory experiences or loud settings or whatever it might be, we're looking at the rest of the world thinking, oh, everyone else can remember this or do this or keep these things straight or stay organized or manage the sensory experience of being out someplace loud. And it's not true, because I think about when we can't do those things, we're not in those settings. So we're comparing ourselves to others that really are not having a similar experience to what we are in some of those situations.
Yeah, and like you said there, so a lot of it, what I find is, and a lot of the clients I find come to me, is not actually to do with the ADHD or the kind of autism or any of the neurodivergence. Is actually to do with, I call it the impacts of having neurodivergence, of being who you are, and the stuff that comes with that, whether, like you said, whether it's been someone said something or someone's like, why are you doing that, or just your own, we internalize everything. And there's now a study that says we internalize 20,000 more negative things by the age of 12 than any other person. But then because of the shame, we lose out, not other people. And it really puts so many layers that really put a dampen on our life and make us live our lives not the way we need to or want to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're missing out, and others can miss out on what we have to offer. Even if it's not known, there's so much that everyone has to offer. I'm curious, I want to ask you, I know that you recently shared openly about a new diagnosis that you received. And I'm curious if you'd be willing to share a little bit about what that process was like, in terms of, did you feel validated and shame at the same time? Or yeah, I'd love to hear more
I love
about
that question.
that.
So I was diagnosed with autism quite recently, and I feel that where I was in my own journey, in my own life, when I was diagnosed with autism, was very different to where I was with ADHD. So that was 4 years ago when I was diagnosed with ADHD. So when I was diagnosed with autism, it was such a relief. It was like, oh my goodness, it makes so much sense. And I think I still had an element of shame, but not as much, because it wasn't, like I always say, my first rodeo. It wasn't my first time being diagnosed with a neurodivergent. But when back 4 years ago, when I was diagnosed with ADHD, at first I was quite embarrassed. I was like, oh my goodness, like I was relieved for myself, but I didn't want to tell people. I didn't want people to know. I went red right in the face. I didn't really think I deserved everything, because for me, for so long, I just put it down to me. So I just assumed it was like an excuse. It was always like the diagnosis gave me something, but the shame was where I was in my life, was built up so much that I couldn't see clearly in front of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You bring up an interesting point, and thank you for sharing all that, because I'm sure there are so many people that are having a similar experience to yours. It makes me curious. So in some of the clients I've worked with, when they're younger, maybe late elementary, middle school, and they get the diagnosis, it's this terrible, I can see it kind of physically in their demeanor and how we interact. It feels like it's very shame-filled for them. And when adults get some sort of diagnosis that validates the challenges they've been having their whole life, it's freeing. I mean, there may be a little bit of shame, but I see a very different experience based on age and what happens with messaging and internalizing versus, okay, well, here I am as an adult, now I'm going to own this. Whereas with younger students, it's like, I want to become small and hide, and I can't believe I have to be coached, or I can't believe I need to be pulled out in the small intervention group or whatever it is. What do you notice with your...
I think that's a really good point. And like I said, like I was younger when I was diagnosed and I'd not got the thing. But then after 4 years of having the diagnosed ADHD, I was older, and it was like, wow, this stuff with autism, my goodness, like, or like, it just made sense. And I really do agree with you with that. But I find that a lot when it's younger people, a lot of the shame comes from people around them. And I think a lot of it comes from that external. And I think that when you get older and you've lived undiagnosed for so long, there's so much shame come from other people, other experiences, that when you get that bit of news that you've got ADHD or autism or anything else, it's like a ray of hope that it all made sense and it's all this stuff. But when you're younger, you've not had that life experience of living so long with this kind of this way of being, that you almost, it's like, well, I mean, why? And you can't, and then almost the shame comes from knowing.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about how to approach this, especially with some of the younger students that are getting this diagnosis, and probably before that, even layers of shame were building at that point. How to support them in being aware of what their challenges are and owning it in a way that's, this is who I am and there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just going to need to learn how to do some things differently.
Well, and around that, what you were saying there about how do we do things differently? What do you think, like, so we get this shame for whatever it is and we internalize it. What do you think that's like, before we get to, what do you think prevents, like, what does it stop us doing? What do you feel that shame stops us from doing?
That's a great question. I think fully realizing who we are and fully living our lives. I imagine we would all experience shame a bit differently. I think one of the common themes is we just want to become small and not be exposed and not have to be vulnerable and expose the things that we have received messaging are shameful.
Yeah. And it comes back to that thing what you were saying, but I remember you were saying earlier that kind of sense of self, right? It almost changes the way you perceive yourself, the way you treat yourself, and the way you do, because the shame has, been brought on upon you, and a lot of it is external that then we take on as ourselves and we internal, and that becomes our view of ourselves.
Yeah.
And that becomes very powerful. What do you think it is about kind of that young age that we need to kind of go there first, other than kind of the older age?
I think at the younger age, there's so much of a sense of self-developing, and it's molding and changing, and it's such a wonderful opportunity to help students build confidence and begin to be compassionate with themselves and to build acceptance for their unique challenges. And we've talked a little bit about how there are unique challenges. And I also think it can be helpful to explain that shame is a part of the overall human experience, that probably every single one of us in our lives can think of at least one thing where we wish we didn't struggle with it, or we wish we didn't need to ask for help, or, whatever that might look like. So I think it's helping to build, skills of resilience and acceptance and compassion while that sense of self is still developing.
Yeah, because like it's that thing of when you get old, it's harder, right? It's harder because we're not developing as much. So you've got to go back and wound the heels and all that stuff. But I think it's really quite key what you said, that it is a human experience, right? Because if it's about, you're shameful about that you got fired, or you've got a job that people don't it's below your pay grade, or you're struggling financially, you spent too much money this month, that you're dating someone that nobody like there's so many areas in our life where we feel shame, with kind of neurodivergent, it's just kind of a different, I don't want to say different type, but it's just more of a kind of unique to the kind of neurodivergent experience, versus shame is just in the kind of neurodivergent world.
Right.
Yeah. And we're gonna pause there, and we're gonna come back, and we're gonna continue talking about shame and about this early intervention, because I really think you're onto a winner there. And we're out.
If you would like any more information on Indigo Hub or our Indigo support group, then please check out our website below, or our link to our social media platforms, or email at indigohub.adhd@gmail.com. If you would like to offer any comments, feedback, get support, or if you're interested in the world hearing your story, then please reach out through any of our avenues. As said before, have a positive week. Check in again later. And we're out.
And we're back. And as always, we start talking through the time. But if you were joining us before, we were joined by Holly, and we were talking about a very deep topic about shame. And we really just opened the floor to kind of how it shows up for humans, but also in the neurodivergence experience, where it comes from, and the difference between what it's like in kind of different ages. And now we're going to kind of talk about how you notice shame, and how you actually can see shame, and how does it just show up? Because we've talked about what it is, what the experience is, but how do we know that?
I think it's such a unique experience for each of us that part of this process is, maybe working with someone to help identify how is it showing up in what we think, in body sensations and images. If you're more of a visual thinker, sometimes I picture it as like a big blob of paint, and then it's like dripping down from my head down over my shoulders and my arms, or like a big heavy wet wool blanket kind of covering, and everyone might have different images or thoughts or even behaviors that come about from this. So I think it's a process of developing self-awareness and trying to figure out how we each experience it.
And I think that's really important, because shame does show up in our body first, right? And then it shows up in our feelings and thoughts, and then it starts to show up in our behaviors. Like, let's say we're going to go out to a birthday party, and we feel ashamed of, oh, we've got this outfit on. We start to feel uncomfortable, and then we start to notice it, and then it's like, oh, I'm going to go, but I'm going to be quiet. So it's a shame. It starts with one thing, and it then nudges more and more into it, and it really then spirals into affecting all parts of our life.
It really does. It erodes something that, I love your example of the party, and it was making me think of, working with someone who might struggle with writing, and say they get an inspiration or an idea, and they're very energized. And then it's, oh no, I don't know how to convey my thoughts. And oh no, last time I didn't get a good grade on this paper. And then it's just this eroding of the energizing experience of getting a great idea down to, I'm a terrible writer. And then that final behavior might be, I'm just not even going to do anything, and I'm not even going to turn it in. And it can just kind of spiral down. And so figuring out where in that spiral we can get help, or we can learn to maybe talk to ourselves a little bit differently, and maybe stop the spiral from going so far. And each time maybe stopping it a little bit sooner, not doing it perfectly, but
that's the thing, isn't it? And it's that thing of, when we start to spiral and we go into that fear and that kind of overwhelming feeling of we're not okay, and that anxious, devastating, depressed, whatever it may be. And it's usually something that triggers us, that has brought on that shame from before, or sometimes like going to a party because I'm in this outfit. It's probably not our own shame or own thing, but we've brought it upon ourselves, and that triggers that shame to come up, and it changes the way we see ourselves and the way we experience that. What, like, kind of thinking about those sensations, where, like, what do you think happens to when we first get those sensations, or someone says something? What do you think happens to that to cause the shame?
Well, I think there's kind of a physical reaction in the nervous system before we can even cognitively identify, oh, that just really upset me. I'm feeling shame in this moment. I think there's a strong physical, oftentimes there can be a strong physical reaction first. And that's why I love to work with teaching people how they start to discern how they're experiencing it in their body, because that is oftentimes the clue to the beginning of that spiral, that downward erosion of whatever we might have been getting ready to do or work on.
Yeah. And then that in time strengthens that experience of, oh, that one person said that, and then the next time we go to a party we wear something different and somebody else says it, or we see it in ourselves and we tell ourselves this, and we tell ourselves that it's not working, and we tell it, and then that just strengthens that kind of experience of the shame in the first place. And then that makes you even more nervous, makes you make more effort. And what do you, like, I'm just kind of going with it here, but like, what do you think that can leave us? Where can that shame leave us?
Well, I think, to kind of go back to your point of like strengthening that experience, those, even if they're external messages that we're receiving, we start to internalize those about beliefs. And then I think we can all think about when we have a belief, we're sort of always collecting evidence to support our belief, because that's just more comfortable. So like you said, if we're working on something, then we're just going to be watching for the things that align with our beliefs that are going to be reinforcing that shame. And then we become less flexible in our minds to address it. It really impacts that internal dialogue that we're having with ourselves.
Yeah, it's almost, I'm just kind of seeing an image of like a factory. So I'm very imagery based.
Yes.
But I'm kind of seeing this like factory, and it's like, the thought comes in. So it comes into the factory, the thought or the comment or the look or whatever happens comes in. And then in the middle of the factory, it creates like a movement of the body. And then it goes into the machine, and then it works out kind of what it is. What is this thought or feeling? And it's like, and then it kind of makes up its mind. And then if it's shame, it goes down here. And then after a while, it goes, yeah, it's shame. Duh. And then more and more stuff starts to come in, and then it starts to kind of put it. So it's almost like a running line. And as more things come, it just adds and adds, becomes more and more busy. And we just create this kind of constant strength of all this stuff coming into our mind that's just creating this more and more evidence, more and more stuff. And where did it all come from? From a look, from a person's comment, from a difference.
Yeah. I absolutely love that image. I tend to be more of a visual thinker too, and that makes a lot of sense to me. And then it just starts piling up and piling up.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious with you, even your experience, that things were piling up for you over the years. What kind of stopped that conveyor belt so that you could pause and start to notice and address some of what you were going through?
I think it was like a lot of, like we were talking about this internal dialogue, and a lot of people were like, why, it was kind of this thing of, wow, I've got ADHD. I kind of went through that. But at first I was quite ashamed about it. And I wasn't in the right time of my life to deal with it. So I waited a while. And I remember one day just like being in bed, and I hadn't done anything. We were in lockdown, and I was just like, oh, you're so lazy. Like, what is wrong with you? And then I just almost like clicked, and I was like, oh, ADHD. No, wait a minute, I'm not lazy. And I was like, wow, like I talk to myself so awfully. And like, I was just like, what is going on? And when I started to speak to coach therapy and all that, I was kind of like, wow, like my ADHD is hard, but actually the shame around who I am and the shame around what I've created because of my ADHD challenges is so much harder. And the way I spoke to myself, I wouldn't speak to a friend like that. And it did create me to go, oh, I'm not going to go to that party, or I'm not going to go to that, or I'm not going to go to that. And it's almost like my internal factory kind of would shut down around a few things because it had got so much stuff around, like baggage and evidence around it.
Yeah. So you've kind of sought out help to find a way to, and thinking about images, I'm just picturing this sort of spiraling arrow that's going down and down and down. And then it's kind of like you found a spot in there to kind of catch it before it went so deep that you couldn't pull yourself back out a little bit. And I'm curious if it felt like a process of, discovering more about yourself and self-awareness.
Yeah, and it was a whole process. It wasn't like one day I woke up and said, I'm not going to say that to myself anymore. If only, right? Tell yourself you love yourself and that will be it. It was a process again, like the process. I always say it's a process to get in your brain. So it's got to be a process to get out your brain or to change in your brain, because it's all a process. And my internal dialogue didn't change overnight. The way I looked at myself, the way picking myself, and still now it doesn't. We're not perfect, right? It doesn't always work, but it's a lot better because I think the first thing for me was, which we've been talking about, is how does it show up? Like, what is your shame?
Yeah.
And how do we know it's there? Because it's like I was saying earlier, like hide and seek. If you don't know if you're trying to see, you don't know, or you don't want to admit it, then there's no way to address it.
I agree. And it's kind of, we're talking about beliefs, but it's sort of my personal belief. It's hard to do this work alone. I think because so much of it is internal and a felt experience, and in our thoughts and our behaviors, it can be really hard to unblend from that and identify it in ourselves. Obviously, there may be people that can work through some of that on their own. I'm not saying it's not possible. I think it can be very helpful to get an outside view to help us begin to identify some of those things.
Yeah, because it's like, right, like I was talking about factory, you create like a potato factory, right? But then actually what you need to look at is a strawberry factory. But if you've only worked in a potato factory your whole life, you can't see the other side. And it's that thing, if you're in your own head, how do you know that it is shame? How do you know that that there is another way when you've got that lens of, because it does lens the way you look at yourself and the way you look at your life.
Yes, it really does.
Yeah. So I think that kind of comes to quite a nice ending there. But we both agreed in the break that this was quite a big topic. So today we've just kind of done a little dip, but we're going to bring this back, aren't we?
We most definitely are. We have a lot more to say about that. A lot more to say about it.
Just to see our shared document, it is very long. So we've got a lot more to talk about. And next time, I think we talked about, really discussing how to identify it, and then what sort of things we can do, like what sort of practices we can do, what sort of mindfulness stuff we can do, what sort of kind of healing we can do to try and kind of overcome, or try and, like we said, take back that control so that we can start to not feel the shame. But like what we're going to do in the next episode is obviously not anything, that a therapist or a coach would do. It's just kind of little things that you can do that might be quite helpful with the shame.
Definitely. It sounds like a hopeful next step for this topic.
Yeah, I hope so, because I think definitely the opposite of shame is hope.
Yes.
Or found. Yeah. So any last words?
Thank you for having me here to talk about this topic. It's something that I strangely had to say, it's a topic that I love. I think there just needs to be so much more discussion about this. So I really enjoyed the opportunity to do this today. Thank you.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. From my own experience and from others, that a lot of this is stuff that, ADHD, neurodivergent, or just being a human, we have, and it's not talked about enough, because guess what? Most of us are quite ashamed that we have shame.
Yes.
And we've always got to we've almost kind of ripped the Band-Aid off, leaved it out, and then next time we'll kind of talk about how to heal that wound.
I think that's a great plan. There is hope and there are things that can be done.
That's a nice way to leave it. There is hope.
Yeah.
So we'll be back in a few weeks with maybe another episode, and we'll be back soon with Holly to carry on this conversation and to bring part 2 of this topic. So if you're interested in coming as a guest, or you've got things that you want us to talk about, then please let us know, right? Share your experience, share these things, because that's the way we get to move forward, and that's the way we are found. So come back, learn, listen, experience the world through not my eyes, our eyes. Why not? Have a great week, and there is hope. And we're out.
Dear Diary, as Indigo Hub's process goes on, it makes me stop and wonder, could there be more for us? More light, more experience, and more ways to see the world through our own eyes. I think this journey will be the